And hello again from Fox News in Washington. Well, it took a while, but Donald Trump finally agreed to an interview on Fox News Sunday. I had asked him some tough questions in the big Fox debate, which he didn't like, and he made that very clear. Now, 2 months later, he sat down for an in-depth interview this weekend at the Trump National Golf Club outside Washington. We discussed the issues, his latest dust-up over President Bush and 9/11, and why he fires back at other candidates and reporters like me. It was vintage Trump. Mr. Trump, good to see you again.
Thank you.
It's become almost a cliche in this political cycle that people are fed up with politicians. But back when you announced in June, most of the so-called experts, including me, thought you had no chance and that people would end up voting for somebody with political experience. How did you know that discontent, frustration with the system would be the prevailing mood in 2015?
I felt it. I felt it from within. We have tremendous discontent in the country. We have tremendous problems in the country. And I felt it early on, or I wouldn't have done this. But I see tremendous discontent.
Before we dig down into some issues, I want to see how much of a disruptor you would be. And let's do a lightning round. Quick questions, okay. Quick answers. Would you be willing to use the debt limit and risk the possibility of the country going into default to get more spending cuts?
Okay. I would use the debt limit. I don't want to say, I want to be unpredictable because, we need unpredictability. Everything is so predictable with our country. But I would be very, very strong on the debt limit. And I would be asking for a very big pound of flesh if I were the Republicans. And the problem with the Republicans, they have two sides. The smaller side is very strong, and the other side is always agreeing. And, you can't do that.
Would you be willing to shut down the government in order to defund Planned Parenthood or to push some other key policy goal?
I do not want to say that because I want to show unpredictability. You have to. You can't just go around and say that. But Planned Parenthood should absolutely be defunded. If you look at what's going on with that, it's terrible. And many other things should be defunded, and many things should be cut.
You said in August that you're, quote, fine with affirmative action. What about conservatives who say the time for that kind of preferential treatment has come and gone?
I'm fine with it. We have it. It's there. But it's coming to a time when maybe we don't need it. That would be a wonderful thing. I don't think we need it so much anymore. It has served its place. It has served its time. Some people have loved it, and some people don't like it at all. But I think there'll be a time when you don't need it.
You are one of the few candidates who has come out with a detailed tax plan. Let's drill down into that. You would cut the 7 tax brackets to 4.
Correct.
0, 10%, 20%, 25%. You'd cut the corporate tax rate from 35% to 15%. You would limit deductions for higher income earners, and you would eliminate carried interest, preferential tax treatment for hedge funders. What's the thinking?
Well, the thinking is we have the highest tax rate in the world. In the entire world, we have the highest tax rate. There's gridlock in Washington because there's no leadership. So what I'm doing is a large tax cut, especially for the middle class, and we're going to have a dynamic country. We're going to have dynamic economics, and it's going to be something really special, and people are going back to work.
But there are two concerns. The Conservative Tax Foundation says that over 10 years you would add $10 trillion to the deficit. And there's also the question of who would benefit under your tax plan. The Tax Foundation says the middle class would see after-tax income increase 7.2%. The top 1% would see a spike of 21.6%. So between that and ending the estate tax, the Trump family and folks like you would make out great.
The estate tax has been a disaster. First of all, it's double taxation. Some people could even say it's triple taxation.
But how about the idea that you're going to blow a hole in the deficit and that the top 1% is going to make out a lot better?
Well, they're going to make
class?
out better if the economy gets better. The economy is very sick. We're losing our jobs to China, to Japan, to every country. We're making horrible trade deals. We are losing jobs in this country. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs are being lost. And part of the reason is our taxes are so high in this country. I'm also cutting. They don't talk about that. And I'm doing that in a different little policy segment that we're going to be announcing in 3 weeks.
Spending.
But we're going to be cutting tremendous amounts of money and waste and fraud and abuse. You know, they had a case.
Would you cut departments?
No, I'm not cutting services, but I'm cutting spending. But I may cut Department of Education. I believe Common Core is a very bad thing. I believe that we should be, educating our children from Iowa, from New Hampshire, from South Carolina, from California, from New York. I think that it should be local education. If you look at a Jeb Bush and some of these others, they want them to be educated by Washington, D.C. bureaucrats. So Department of Education is one. Environmental protection, what they do is a disgrace. Every week they come out with new regulations. They make it impossible.
Who's going to protect the environment?
We'll be fine with the environment. We can leave a little bit, but you can't destroy businesses.
You brought up trade. You would end NAFTA, you would kill the Pacific Trade Agreement, you would impose tariffs on some products like 35% on Ford cars made in Mexico. The Wall Street Journal says that you are running as, quote, the most anti-trade candidate since Herbert Hoover.
Okay, so here's the story. First of all, the Wall Street Journal was bought for $5 billion. It's now worth $500 million, okay? They don't have to tell me what to do. The Wall Street Journal has been wrong so many different times about so many different things. I am all for free trade, but it's got to be fair. When Ford moves their massive plant to Mexico, we get nothing. We lose all of these jobs. What do we get out of it? I don't want them to move their plants.
But I want to pick up on that because...
No, the point is, I don't want them to move their plants. I want them to stay in Michigan. I want them to stay in all of the places where they are or expand into other places. But I want it to be in the United States. I don't want them to go to Mexico. I don't want them to go to China.
This brings up the point. The conservative American Enterprise Institute says, look, Donald Trump, he owns a dozen hotels, properties all over the world. Your Trump collection clothing line, some of it is made in Mexico and China.
That's true. I want it to be made here.
I know, but the point they say is you're doing just what Ford is. You're taking advantage of a global trading market.
I never dispute that. I put it in my speeches. I say the ties are made in China and different things. I don't want that. I just ordered 4,000 television sets. You know where they come from? South Korea. And yet we defend South Korea for practically nothing. We have 28,000 soldiers. They're making a fortune. I don't want to order them from South Korea. I don't think anybody makes television sets in the United States anymore. I don't want to order from South Korea. I want to order from here. I talk about it all the time. We don't make anything anymore. Now you look at Boeing. Boeing's going over to China. They're going to build a massive plant because China's demanding it in order to order airplanes from Boeing. So Boeing now is going to China building a massive plant. I don't want that. I don't want that.
You say that eminent domain is wonderful. And you
I don't say wonderful. I say eminent domain is something you need, Chris. Eminent domain, if I build a highway... Chris, and I know exactly what you're saying, but if I build a highway, and if something's in the way of the highway, you're going to have to do something with it.
I understand that, and that's the idea of taking private property for a public use.
And by the way, the people get paid for it. Everyone thinks they don't get paid. They get paid a lot of money.
But in the Kelo case, the big Supreme Court case in 2005, they took somebody's home and they sold it and bought it, and then they sold it to private entrepreneurs, private developers, and that's the question.
That's different.
But that's the question I'm going to ask you.
That's different.
Do you support taking private property for private use?
If somebody has a property in the middle of a 7,000 job factory, as an example, that's going to move into the town, but they need this one corner of his property, and it's going to provide 7,000 jobs in a community that's dying, of which we have many in this country, okay? I am for that. That's a big economic development. But remember this, all of these people that we're talking about, they're friends of mine. They all love the Keystone Pipeline, right? The Keystone Pipeline is all eminent domain. They're building that pipeline without eminent domain. You wouldn't be able to build it.
But let me ask you, because you were involved in a case like this, as you know, in the 90s.
That was an economic development.
In Atlantic City.
Sure.
You had your hotel,
and
you wanted to build a parking lot, and some woman had her house.
She saved me a fortune.
I guess the question is, why do you need to take her house for a parking lot?
I'll tell you why. Because I have a hotel, and in order to expand the hotel and add 2,000 rooms, I would have had to take her thing. Now, the 2,000 rooms would have provided about 2,500 jobs. Ultimately, I offered a lot of money. She didn't take it. I didn't build the job. I didn't do it. Saved me a lot of money because Atlantic City, I had the good sense to leave 7 years ago. I got very lucky. Yeah, I think that would have been a good eminent domain because you would have provided thousands of jobs. And this is a woman that couldn't have cared less about her house. All she wanted was money.
Something you said on Friday has stirred up some controversy about George W. Bush and the Twin Towers.
When you talk about George Bush, I mean, say what you want. The World Trade Center came down during his time. If you look
Hold
at
on,
Sandy Hook,
you can't blame George Bush for that.
he was president, okay? Don't blame him or don't blame him, but he was president. The World Trade Center came down during his reign.
Jeb Bush responded to your comments with a tweet. He said, "How pathetic." Question, do you blame George W. Bush for 9/11?
Look, Jeb said we were safe with my brother. We were safe. Well, the World Trade Center just fell down. Now, am I trying to blame him? I'm not blaming anybody. But the World Trade Center came down. So when he said we were safe, that's not safe. We lost 3,000 people. It was one of the greatest, probably the greatest catastrophe ever in this country, if you think about it, right?
What would you have done?
Well, I would have been much different, I must tell you. Somebody said, well, it wouldn't have been any different. Well, it would have been. I am extremely, extremely tough on illegal immigration. I'm extremely tough on people coming into this country. I believe that if I were running things, I doubt those families would have, I doubt that those people would have been in the country. So there's a good chance that those people would not have been in our country. With that being said, I'm not blaming George Bush, but I don't want Jeb Bush to say, my brother kept us safe, because September 11th was one of the worst days in the history of this country.